Welcome back. We are doing Civic stuff again. Now in the last video we blew the Civic up. We were doing a pull and it hydrolocked it, cracked the sleeve. So we are looking for a new engine for this, and that's why we pulled out the mystery B18 from under the shelf. I traded this engine back in the day for a single cam, and then it's been sitting under the shelf for about 2 years now. So this is our mystery B18. We're going to pull it apart in this video, just see if it is actually worth it to go ahead and swap this engine into this car, perhaps, because we also have a new D16 over there, and over here we have a whole bunch of parts for it to build a Vitara forged D16. So those are options, but in this video we are pulling apart this engine to see, because we are going to use this engine anyway, whether it is in this car or not in this car. Now we are going to put a VTEC head on it if we use it, and we are going to put these rod cap bolts in it. So what this does is it strengthens up the rod cap bolts, and then you can rev it higher, because these B18s are not really a high revving engine like the B16. So if you rev them too high, they'll likely rip the cap off and destroy the engine. So the future plan is VTEC head, upgraded rod bolts, and then it should be able to rev it fairly high, fairly safe. You can probably rev it to 8,000, 9,000, depending on how brave you want to be. We probably won't rev it that high, but you know, we'll see. But we are going to tear this down, see if it's even worth getting into it, because like I said, this is a mystery engine. You can see it was burning oil, because that is, you know, it's quite a thick build-up over there. Everything is RTV'd, sump is RTV'd, there's oil all over the front of it, so it kind of looked like it was a bit neglected. Now we do also have a new turbo, and we are going to use it, whether we use the B18 or the D16 over there. We are going to use this new turbo, because the one that's on the car, it made about 180 horsepower. And it was at 10 psi, but at a high RPM the boost started falling off, and then the power curve did the same thing. So you know, that was a bit weird. I didn't think that this turbo that was on here would run out of breath. So this one is very similar, but it is slightly bigger, so you know, that should solve our problem of the boost falling off and then the power also falling off. And that's kind of why we couldn't really get this car to 200 horsepower, just because it didn't want to, and then it refused, and then eventually it just blew up the whole engine. So engine I was in here was really fighting us. That's why we are now investigating. Do we go B18 or do we go Vitara D16? Good thing is we have everything for that to go. That's already been to the machine shop. This one obviously has to still go to the machine shop. If you install these rod bolts, you have to make sure that they check the roundness on the rod caps. So you kind of have to send it to engineering so they can install these and then check the roundness. If it's not round, they will machine it to make the rod caps round again. Packaging looks quite nice, which is good, because it does look like this box had a hard time getting here. It is quite cool. It's like an expanding foam packaging kind of thing. Make sure the thing doesn't flop around in here. We have some gaskets, sticker. Oh yes. Oh, that looks nice. Okay, so I do want to see what this compressor wheel looks like, so I'm going to take this compressor housing off. You should be able to take it off just by taking off these bolts on the back here. Turns out I was right. This is a billet compressor wheel. You can see it from this texture here. So this starts out as a billet piece of aluminium, and then the CNC machine spent several hours machining it down into a compressor wheel. That's pretty cool for a turbo of this price. Anyway, thanks to MaxpeedingRods for sending this out. It's not easy for the smaller YouTube channels to get sponsors, so really appreciate it. Okay, so we pulled the valve cover off and this looks really good. Yes, there's a lot of silicone on here, so this guy probably had a lot of oil leaking problems. But if you look at the actual cams, you will see that the cams are actually in very, very good condition. There's no scoring or scratch marks on them, which normally if you have a rod failure, what will happen is it'll block up your oil filter and it'll just pass all that shavings into the engine and it will end up scratching up your cams quite badly. So looking at these, you know, they're in very good condition. They do have a little bit of wear marks here and there, but you know, nothing to be concerned about. So you know, just looking up here, this does look very good. I'm sure initially when I traded this engine for my single cam, I did pull the valve cover off because the bolts were already off, and I probably checked in here, and this is probably what made me decide to trade the engine, just because of how clean the top of the head is here. Now going over here to the valve cover, you can see very clean, actually suspiciously clean. This can get quite gunked up if you don't service your engines, but looking over here, we actually have a signature and a date. So there's two signatures here and the date, 15/10/11, meaning very likely this engine or this head was redone at some point. So I'm kind of thinking that this engine was rebuilt around 2011, which can be a good thing, you know, in terms of if you just want to put this engine in your car, but it can be a bad thing if you're actually looking to boost this thing. Because if your rings are not worn in and you have very tight ring gaps and you boost the engine, what will happen is the rings will heat up, they'll touch each other, and you'll rip the ring lands off your pistons, or you'll score up your sleeves if you boost this engine with really tight ring gaps. So another good thing while we're pulling this whole engine apart is checking those ring gaps, because possibly this engine was rebuilt very long ago, so maybe it's worn out again, but you don't really want to take that risk unless you don't really care for taking a risk and pulling the engine out later. Anyway, this being a double overhead cam, you have to actually pull your cams out before you can get to the head studs. On a single cam, you can get to the head studs without pulling any cams out, so at this point you could take the head out, where on a B series you can't. You have to pull the cam caps and the cams first. Okay, so we're getting ready to take the cams out. I like to use this 6-point instead of this multi-spline one, just because this one is far less likely to strip a bolt, depending on how old these caps are and how long they will put in. Sometimes they can put in a bit of a fight and you might round off one of these bolts. When it comes to taking them out, you want to do reverse order. So order would be starting from the center outwards. So reverse order for taking them out, you will start from the outside inwards. So you would do the far one, that one, this one, that one, this one, until it's loose. Now most people will just zip these out, and that's actually a mistake. You do not want to actually zip all of them out at the same time, because what's going to happen is you're going to take out one, and then this is going to be your last cap that is at full torque still, and that could bend your camshaft. If you look at a Honda service manual, it will actually say tighten each bolt 2 turns at a time in sequence shown below, and it will show you your sequence. Now this is for assembly. Disassembly is the opposite of that. So you actually just want to crack them loose, and then 2 turns at a time, loosen these bolts up until they are actually loose, so you don't end up with one cap still torqued to spec and the others completely removed. So like you guys saw there, what I like to do is just crack all of them loose first and then slowly loosen them until all of them is loose. So you're slowly loosening them all at the same time, same way you're putting them in. Now you'll feel the tension is off them, so now it's basically just the springs that will be pushing the camshaft up. So at this point you can actually just zip them all out. Now what you can do is you can pry these corners with a screwdriver to get these caps to lift off, because there is dowels in here, so sometimes they will be stuck, or you can use a mallet to try and break them loose. I'm going to use this rubber part of the hammer and see if we can do it that way. So we made our first mistake. These actually have 2 bolts. So there's another set of bolts here and here. Okay, so that was our first mistake. You don't really want to do that. Now on the B18s, these caps are all loose, unlike the B16s where you have a plate over the top of them, so you kind of have to take these off, because if you just take the cam off, these things are going to fall out. Luckily they are numbered, so you can see 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, so you would know what sequence to put them back in. And it also says I, and this side says E, so E is for exhaust and I is for intake. So you know this is for the intake side and that is for the exhaust side. So you can just pull these off. Sometimes these bolts will still get stuck in there. Okay, so we have the cams out and I laid them out over here so we can inspect them. Camshafts are in really good shape. I don't know if you guys were able to pick it up on the camera, but you know there isn't much in terms of score marks on them. They are actually in quite good shape. There's a bit of discoloration on the lobes, but that could just be because it's sat for 2 years. So you know a bit of moisture in there might discolor those lobes. It could be like early form of, you know, a tiny bit of surface rust. But you know it doesn't feel like rust. Everything feels smooth. I can't catch my nail anywhere except here on the exhaust. This one here has a few score marks on it that I can actually catch my nail on it. Not easily, but you can feel there's actually score marks on this one. Looking at these caps on the inside, they all look very good. This one here has a scratch in it, and this one here also has a scratch in it. So this is kind of the only one where I can catch my finger. I can't really, you know, catch my finger in this one, but you can see it. And you know the other ones look quite good. I would be happy to, you know, reuse this head, put it back together and use it again, because I've seen much worse and then they actually still run fine. Coming back to the cylinder head over here, you can notice a little bit of wear on all these pads, but you know it's a high mileage engine, so you have to expect there will be wear on stuff. Same with this pad over here, there is a tiny bit of wear in it. I can't actually catch my nail here as well, but you can see the cam has a slight indent here. It has made a mark on the surface over here. In terms of scoring, the only one I notice is this one over here. There's a tiny bit of scoring in here and I can catch my nail on it. The oil feed, this hole is an oil feed, so if any contaminated oil gets into here, it will get in right here. So I'll try and catch it on the camera, but it's not really that visible. Overall, this is not bad. This is definitely a cylinder head I would still run. This is very minor scoring for, you know, considering how old it is, and buying a mystery engine like this, you know, it is always a risk. Now these things, I believe they are still called rockers, even though they're not the same as the other Honda ones, but do not mix them up. So most people will pull them out, and the thing is, when you put them back, that is okay, you can put them back anywhere, they are the same, but they have the valve lash adjustment on here, so if you mix these up, you're gonna have to readjust your valve lash on all of them, where if you put it back in the exact same spot it came out, your valve lash will probably be in or very close, where if you mix them up, your valve lash is going to be all over the place. So in this case, I'm actually not even going to take them out. It is very easy to take them out, but in my case, I'm not going to take them out. If you do take them out, I would say, you know, put them in a row, stack them somewhere where you're not going to mix them up, and you can put them back in the exact same place later on. Another thing is here you can see your loosening sequence. And if you read at the top here, it will say, caution, to prevent warpage, unscrew the bolts in sequence, quarter turn at a time. Repeat the sequence until all bolts are loosened. Again, like the cam caps, you don't want one bolt to be completely tight and the others to be loosened. So loosen them quarter turn at a time. Don't just zip your head studs out with the impact, because you can actually warp your head, unless you plan on throwing the head away. Okay, the head studs are all out. They are over here, and they are all the same length except for the center two. The center two are slightly longer. You can see the length difference in them. It's quite a big difference. So, you know, that's something you have to keep in mind when you're doing head stud shopping. Other than that, we're going to pull off the intake. So, you know, it's just these bolts here. That's quite easy. I'm going to take that off just so it's easier to maneuver the head. And then we're going to see how easy this head wants to come off here. Okay, so intake is off. The ports look okay. Number one looks fine. These have a bit of muck in them, so you know, you can assume the car was breathing a bit. Then again, you know, it's a 30-year-old engine, so you can't really expect it to not breathe or still be in perfect condition. So the breather is letting a bit of oil into the intake manifold. That is normal for high mileage cars. The exhaust is actually where it's quite bad. I've shown you guys this, but there's quite a lot of build-up in the exhaust. Normally means it's burning oil or it was running way too rich. Okay, so the head is off and it kind of looks okay in here. You can see this head has definitely been off because you can see there's scratch marks here, and this is normally, you know, how people would, let me show you over there. So that's how people normally clean off the old gasket. You just scrape it with something. It's not the ideal thing to do, but yes, this has definitely been replaced because you can see that it's been cleaned up. And you know, the factory is not gonna, you know, do that, so that kind of gives it away. So yes, these cylinders are quite dirty. There's definitely looks like, I'm not sure if that's carbon. I wonder if that's just carbon that's in here. No, it disintegrates, so you can't really pick it up. Yes, that's probably just carbon that, you know, fell from the cylinder head in here after, you know, sitting for 2 years. What I'm going to do now is rotate the engine and inspect the sleeves. Put a bit of WD-40 or, you know, just penetrating oil in here while we rotate it and see, you know, how the sleeves end up looking. Because like I said, I do want to keep the stock pistons in here and I do want to keep the stock sleeves. That's the one thing I don't want to replace. B-series forged pistons are very expensive, so I don't want to go with the cheap aftermarket one, and I don't want to replace them with OEM ones. And it's not like, you know, the D-series, you can go with these YCP pistons and they're known to hold good power. They're not forged and they're quite cheap, but you know, they hold good power. On the B series, it's a bit more expensive. You can go with the Nippon ones, but as soon as you go forged, you're looking at $600-700 just for pistons. That's out of budget, so I want to keep these pistons in here. The only thing I want to change here is the piston rings and make sure that the gap is perfect for boost. Okay, so sleeves and pistons all cleaned up. These two do have a bit of rust in them, so there's a small bit of rust down here that I can feel. It does feel like it is surface rust, so I'm hoping we can just hone it and that will all hone out and we won't have any issues or any pitting. Problem with pitting is if you have pitting in your sleeves, the oil will actually go and sit in the pit, so as the piston comes up, it will deposit oil in those pits and it will scrape it down. And obviously your rings can't scrape the oil out of the pits, so what's going to happen is you're going to burn oil in the cylinders that has pitting in the sleeves. And it kind of will always burn oil. There's nothing you can do about it unless you bore out the cylinder 20 over and then get oversized pistons. Then you'll basically have a new sleeve or just a new sleeve surface. I'm hoping a hone will do it. It does feel like this is surface. These two I can feel the rust marks, so cylinder 1 and 2. 3 and 4 actually feels fine. You can see there's a few marks, so if you look in here, you know, there's a bit of marks down there, but it's smooth to the touch completely. Where on this one you can see there's a tiny bit of rust in there, and you know, you can feel that. Rotating to the others, same story with this one. This one actually looks a lot worse, but it feels a lot better, so you can't really feel that mark there. You can only feel the small area here. And then this one feels really good, really smooth, but you can see it also has marks, and there's a tiny bit of surface rust on this edge here. However, this one feels very smooth, and I'm pretty sure this will come out. My worry is these two, because they do have, you can feel it, and when you rotate it, you can hear the piston rings going over those marks. So yes, hoping that a hone will do it, but not sure that it will. Now continuing to the cylinder head, and as we can see, we burned a lot of oil in this engine. This is quite crusty. So luckily the stuff we found inside the cylinders, we now know it's just carbon buildup. I did put the cams back just so we don't lose all those rockers. Okay, so I rotated the cam and we have two open intake valves, and good news, they do not move at all. So it doesn't feel like there's any play on the valve guides, which is good. Probably means that they did redo this head at some point. But you can see it was also sanded, so they did at some point change the head gasket and then just sand the surface clean. If you know what you're doing, you can sand the head surface clean, but if you don't know what you're doing, you should rather not do that. Normally you just send it in and they will deck it for you. Now for the cylinder head, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. It's really not that bad considering how old it is. And when it comes to this, apart from it being stored incorrectly and obviously getting moisture in it, other than that, it's also not bad. So I'll probably give this about a 6.5. But I'm hoping a hone will fix it. Anyway, we're going to rotate the engine now, pull the sump off and see how the bearings look. It's not going well. Turns out it still has oil in it. I do not remember this engine still having oil in it. But yes, it still had oil in it, and now it's all over my floor. Okay, so that was a disaster, but the good news is the oil that came out doesn't have any noticeable flakes in it. It's very dark, does point to neglect, but no noticeable shavings. Or, shavings that I would worry about. Anyway, back to the engine. Let's try that again. Okay, that is not good. I do not know what the fuck that is. Anyway, I'm going to cut the video here just because if I keep on editing, this video is going to be an hour long. I don't really think that's going to be good for my channel. So depending on when you're watching this, part 2 is probably already available. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all in part 2.